The notification counter remained at 0. Ahmed stared at the screen until his vision blurred, then gripped the device until his knuckles ached. He hurled the phone onto the sofa, the impact muted by the cushions. He paced the length of the room, stopping only to confront his own reflection in the glass. He flexed, checked his wrist, and let out a sharp, jagged breath. A stack of unpaid bills sat near the door. He kicked them into the shadows, scattering the paper across the floor. He grabbed his coat and stepped out into the cold air. 2 blocks away, Sarah sat in the corner of a crowded cafe. Her laptop screen glowed, displaying images of distant shores she had never touched. She traced the lines of her own face, sighed, and snapped the computer shut. The display died instantly, leaving her in the dim light. Moments later, they passed on the sidewalk. Ahmed looked down at his screen. Sarah looked down at hers. They walked within inches of each other, eyes locked on glowing glass, searching for a validation that refused to arrive. The city moved around them, loud and indifferent, while they drifted through the crowd like ghosts, each carrying the weight of a life built on nothing. Miles from the city, the air turned thin and smelled of dry earth. Yusuf sat on the porch, his back against a splintered wooden pillar. He broke a piece of bread and held it out. A stray cat padded across the boards, took the morsel from his fingers, and settled at his feet. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the dust. Yusuf watched the horizon, his hands resting on his knees, still and steady. He whispered a prayer into the rising evening breeze. Then, the sound of heavy footsteps broke the silence. A young man marched up the path, his face twisted, his stride uneven. He stopped at the edge of the porch, panting, his chest heaving with every breath. He began to speak, the words coming out in a rush of jagged sentences, detailing a deal that had collapsed, a loss of reputation, and a mountain of mounting debt. The young man paced back and forth, his hands shaking as he gestured toward the empty road. He looked at Yusuf, waiting for an answer, for a mirror to his own frantic energy. Yusuf did not move. He kept his gaze fixed on the visitor, his breathing slow and rhythmic. The air between them tightened as the young man leaned in, his voice rising, demanding an explanation for his failure. The young man reached his limit. He stepped toward the table and slammed his fist down, the wood shuddering under the force of the blow. The cat bolted, vanishing into the shadows of the porch. The young man stood hunched, his knuckles red, his breath coming in short, harsh gasps. He glared at Yusuf, searching for a reaction, a flinch, or even a brief spark of matching irritation. None came. Yusuf remained motionless. His posture did not shift by a single degree. He reached out with a steady hand and poured a glass of water from a ceramic pitcher. The liquid hit the glass with a sharp, clear sound that seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. He slid the glass across the table toward the young man. The water rippled, reflecting the fading light. Yusuf said nothing. He did not offer a solution for the lost money or a defense against the failed deal. He simply waited. The young man stood over him, his chest heaving, his fist still clenched by his side. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Yet Yusuf did not break it. He kept his head bowed slightly, his breathing deep and unhurried. He was an anchor in a storm, forcing the other man to face the vacuum left by his own rage. Years passed, and the frantic pace of the city faded into a distant echo. The young man stood in a space that held no trace of his former life. The walls were plain, stripped of the art and ornaments he once used to measure his success. He stood by a wooden table, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked down at his hands, calloused from labor, and then across the room toward his wife. She was setting 2 plates on the table. There was no vanity in their movements, no performance for a digital audience. He walked toward her, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He did not check a screen. He did not look for a notification. He stopped beside her and reached out, his fingers closing around her hand. The contact was firm and grounded. Outside the window, the sun caught the edge of the roof, but inside, the light was soft and still. He felt the weight of her palm against his, a simple physical fact that anchored him completely. The ambition that had once driven him to scream and strike tables had vanished, replaced by the quiet rhythm of their shared breathing. He tightened his grip, pulling her slightly closer. And they stood there in the center of the room, connected by nothing but the present moment. They sat at the table, the surface once smooth by years of use. A bowl of soup sat between them, steam rising in thin, vertical ribbons. He lifted his spoon, the metal clinking softly against the ceramic. There was no music playing in the background, only the sound of their own steady respiration. The phone lay on a shelf in the hallway, its screen dark, its battery long drained. It did not matter. No notifications blinked. No digital demands reached through the door. Outside, the city continued its relentless cycle of chasing shadows and seeking approval. But here, the air felt dense with a different kind of gravity. He watched his wife pour water, her movements precise and unhurried. She caught his gaze, and they shared a nod, a silent exchange that required no validation from any external source. He felt the floor beneath his feet, solid and unyielding. The hunger that had once clawed at him for status or applause had vanished, leaving behind a profound, unwavering clarity. He took a slow breath, tasting the simple warmth of the meal. They were entirely present, anchored to the marrow of their own existence, possessing a resilience that no criticism could touch and no praise could ever improve. In the quiet, the ego dissolved, leaving only the weight of peace,